Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Off Code. I am Monique Dusan.
And I am Kevin Briggins, and we are back again for another episode. And this episode is on a more serious topic. I know we like to joke around and have a good time, but I'm having a hard time with this intro kind of being that way because this topic is so serious.
It is. It's really serious. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and with all the conversations circulating around Diddy, we kind of thought that it would be an appropriate topic to talk about domestic violence in the Black community. And so while this topic is heavy, we still want to make sure that we're keeping it real and talking about issues that, are relevant to our community. Black women have a very high rate of domestic violence. Black men do as well. And so we've invited our friend Kat Elias, a licensed clinical social worker, on to just talk about domestic violence with us and help us understand some of what happens or what contributes to domestic violence. And what are some ways in which people can find freedom from domestic violence? All right, with that, let's bring out Kat.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Kat, how you doing?
Hey,
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Thanks. Kevin was just saying he's not excited to talk about this topic.
I know, but I am excited to get the word out there. I think there's a lot that we can do.
Yes, I hope so. Let's just start out by having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me on here. My name is Kat Elias. I am a licensed clinical social worker, like Monique said. I'm a believer, first and foremost, and I am married to my amazing husband, Manny Elias, and we have 7 children with a blended family. And I'm a homeschooling mom. I homeschool my youngest 4. And I have a ministry that is for women where we go over healthy relationships, healthy thinking, and healthy living. And that is called Beautifully Rooted. And it is spelled BEYOU. And I have a podcast that I produce. My husband and I co-host that's called the Rooted and Edified Show. And it's a conservative Christian podcast that we are very excited about and we like to talk about. And I have a small, teeny tiny certificate in apologetics that I recently got. So that's kind of exciting. And I can hardly finish a sentence without a dad joke, a mom joke, or a pun, but I'm going to try today.
Well, you and Kevin will be in the same good category of dad jokes.
Yes, very excited
there. All right, let's jump in. I guess my first question is do Black women or do African Americans overall experience DV at higher rates than other ethnic groups?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the answer is yes, they do. Well, I'm sorry. Statistically, yes, they do. Now, when it comes to reporting DV, it's really hard to know who's reporting and who's not. And so based off of the statistics, yes, Black women have a higher rate. Now, it's higher, but the average is high. So it's not that it's so statistically different as in, 20%, 30% different, but it is different. And Black women have a high rate. It's more than half. So at about 53.6% would be non-Hispanic Black women. Men, this is a very surprising thing, is that men have a super high rate. And you would think that when we talk about domestic violence, it usually refers to women, but actually men have just about equal. And in this case, Black men have a little bit more at 57.6%.
Whoa. Okay. So I wouldn't have thought that.
I know. And again, it may be what's reported, right? Black women
Wow.
be reporting as much, but it is very high.
Some of the numbers that I saw from last year looked at the rates of Black women versus white women, and it said more than 40% of Black women experience intimate partner violence during their lifetime, compared to only 30% of white women. But what it sounds like, or 31% of white women, what it sounds like you're saying is that even based on those numbers, like the numbers are still higher than that.
Yeah, and every study that I saw, it was higher. And I did
Wow.
see a range between 40-something% to up to this 50-something%, but it was always higher. And I think one thing that is super startling is that Black women, one of the stats that's, again, startling, is that Black women are more likely to be killed. The Black women are 3 times more likely to be killed by a current or former partner than members of other racial groups. And I thought that was something that was astounding.
That really is, because 9 times out of 10, they're being killed by most likely a Black man.
They are.
Which, man, Kevin, I don't know if you want to say anything or jump in, because
these numbers are way more than I expected. I did not expect numbers this high. So I think that would help me and maybe help the audience. How do you define domestic violence? When they say 40% of Black women will experience that in their lifetime, what qualifies as that? Because that sounds like a really high number to me.
It is very high. So this particular stat, let's say the one that says 53.6% of Black women, that was more than, let me see here, any contact, sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking, in comparison to an overall stat of 47.3%.
Wow.
In some other studies, let me see here. Women, the 47.3%, the average, that's not related to just Black women, but that's overall. That's any, same thing, any contact, sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking, hit, kicked, hair pulled, slammed against something, choked, suffocated, beaten, burned, knife, gun.
Wow. What are we doing?
And same thing for men, 45%.
Wow.
Something that was also astounding in the stats that I found is that it was significantly higher, it was significantly higher for those that cohabitated versus those that were married. It was significantly higher. I'll try to see if I can find my stats in here, but it was significantly higher. And that's something that plagues our community as well.
Wow. So not only are we, and I guess if I look at this in total, Kevin, I think an episode we did last year looking at Black marriage, it was like, what was it? 1 in 4 Black women were going to get married over the course of their lifetime.
Yeah.
If only 1 in 4 is getting married, there's a lot more of us who are cohabitating. And if we're cohabitating and having kids and things like that, it sounds like, I'm not saying that there's a correlation between this or, causation or, things like that, but that it seems like there potentially could be some kind of relationship to people who are cohabitating and having kids. I don't know if it's frustration. I don't know what the reasons would be, but those people have higher amounts of domestic violence. That is, yeah,
I think there is a correlation, and I just have to find the stat that has that. I think there could be lots of reasons. I mean, for those that are willing to cohabitate, there's underlying stuff there that probably leads to being a little more susceptible to domestic violence. Plus, there's things like you might not have a biblical worldview if you're cohabitating, right? Or if you are cohabitating, you might not have the correct biblical worldview, even if you think you're Christian, right? So you might not have that Christian character that's in line with the biblical worldview, which is going to lead to more acts that aren't godly. I think there's various reasons that somebody's cohabitating. Somebody who's cohabitating might have more domestic violence. There's not that same commitment. There's not a legal commitment, right? So I think there's a lot of psychological things that go along with that as well. There might be more stress. There might be finances might be difficult to manage. More stress, more domestic violence. Children. I think there's a lot of different reasons that might be. It's just very unfortunate.
Yeah, it is definitely very unfortunate. When you think about having conversations about things like cohabitation or domestic violence, do you think those conversations are different based on ethnic culture or the ethnic group?
Yeah, it was very difficult for me to try to find information on how does each culture view domestic violence and how do they approach it, and are Are they highly against it? Do they speak out? It was very difficult to find that. When it came to the white culture, that was very difficult. I was able to find some things of different ethnicities, but not as much white culture. What I did find is that they utilize mental health services more. So if there's any correlation to being able to speak out to communicate, to seek services, if there is communication, then I think that could tell us that the white culture might be more likely to discuss this topic. When it came to Asian cultures, it was widely varied from the stats that I saw. The Asian cultures, in some, the domestic violence was actually really high. And in others, they had a really high percentage of thinking, this is not something that you should report. This is something that is a personal problem that you should not report. It really has more to do with that individual person. And so we believe that there's a lot of underreporting. It's kind of like in the 80s when everybody thought, nope, that's their own personal problem. We don't report. That's kind of in the Asian cultures. On certain Asian cultures, when it comes to the Latino community, what I found was that, there tends to be more machismo that is still around, even though they're working those things out. So you're going to have more domestic violence with machismo. And if there are people, what I did find is that if there are people that don't have papers and there's domestic violence occurring, they're less likely to report because they don't want to be taken out. And one interesting culture that I found that is underreported and really not looked into a lot is the disabled community. I did see some things on the deaf community. It is rampant, but it's not well reported. It's not well discussed. So I thought that was very interesting in regards to different cultures. I think in the Black community, we're aware, but I don't think that it is talked about a lot. I think that it was more accepted, as in this is just part of the culture. This is just part of how we express ourselves. I think that it is more hidden. I don't think that we have the same conservative, traditional family values to where when there's domestic violence that's occurring, it's apparent. And everybody runs that out. They're not going to tolerate that at all. But now we have in our culture now, unfortunately, we have role models that advocate domestic violence, that make it look good and make it fun and make it look as if it's the way that it's supposed to be. And I think that now we just accept it as kind of the way it is. And then, unfortunately, I think considering there is a lower marriage rate, I think that sometimes we're just more willing to accept, the leftovers, that at least this half thing is better than the whole thing, which is not true at all. I think that in our community, also, there's this belief that Black women can just handle anything. And we do handle a lot. Oh my goodness. We are, there's this super Black woman that can just handle children, work, and handle everything. And I think when that pressure's there, it's kind of like a perfectionist. It's really hard to say, actually, this is not good. Actually, this is not okay. It's very hard to admit domestic violence is occurring. And sometimes we just look the other way. It's very unfortunate.
You bring up a good point about people, undocumented immigrants. When I worked in social service, a very, very long time ago, one of the communities that I worked with was specifically domestic violence and a domestic violence shelter and, things like that. And what I saw with people who were undocumented was this fear that their kids would be taken, they would be deported, they're going to get in trouble. And so now they must stay in a battered situation, with their domestic violence partner. But that actually isn't true. They're especially not, in our state of California, that is definitely not true. But there are even resources for people who experience domestic violence and, may be undocumented. But then in looking at times and working with people who are Black, it seems like the big piece of that puzzle was that family members would automatically say, well, that's not my business. And I was just like, you know what I mean? So asking someone, well, who's the family, who is, someone who can serve as a support system to you and things like that. And it's like, well, they're kind of, just keeping to themselves and largely
or a private community.
Yeah, it is this thing of a private community, but it also takes at one point, the number was like 7 attempts for a woman to leave before she actually commits to, like, this is my number, like, I'm done. And so I think what people don't understand too is that the conversations may be different in the different communities, but there are some things that are the same, and like how long it can actually take a survivor to leave. Kevin, were you gonna say something? Sorry.
Yeah. So when I think of domestic violence, my mind automatically goes to what's love got to do with it, Lawrence Fishburne playing Ike Turner, and the Ike and Tina. So and I think that's most people's kind of visual of domestic violence. But when we talk about the numbers we're talking about, it seems like domestic violence can look very differently. And it doesn't have to be that Ike Turner level of physical violence for it to be domestic violence, right? So are there like, do they rate domestic violence like a level 1 or a level 2? Like, is there any kind of distinguishing kind of rating system to show, I don't know, is there a way to distinguish between a guy who shoved his girlfriend one time versus the Ike Turner who's beating Tina, very violently? Is there any kind of, do they distinguish between those type of actions within like the system, I guess you could say?
Within the stats?
Well, not just the stats, or just discussing domestic violence. Okay.
Yes. So domestic violence. So the stats that I gave you were related to physical violence, right? Which is only one type of domestic violence. So we could talk about what are some other kinds of
yes. What are some other kinds?
Okay. So the stats I gave you, those are related to physical violence. Some stats that have to do with psychological aggression include very similar numbers. 50% of women, 45% of men that are dealing with psychological aggression, not physical, psychological aggression. That includes entrapment, expressive aggression, coercive control, demanding, all these kind of things. And actually, they found that psychological aggression and emotional abuse actually was more indicative of PTSD. It was more of a stronger indicator than actually physical violence itself. And so it's very important. And 95% of men who physically abuse their intimate partners also psychologically abuse them. And there's some more stats I can go through. If we're discussing what are different types of domestic violence that are out there, because most of us think, oh, sure, if somebody has a black eye, that's what we think about, right?
Yeah.
If they're pushed, if they're shoved. But actually, there's a lot more. And it's very, very, very important for you to know that so that you can recognize the signs before it gets there, because it doesn't typically start with physical violence. It usually starts with the emotional stuff. So here's a few ways that it may manifest itself. So domestic violence, it's also referred to as intimate partner violence. It's in dating abuse or relationship abuse. So this can occur in dating, this can occur in marriage, and it can occur with teens, it can occur with young adults, which is one of the highest populations. And it can include things that include physical, emotional, sexual abuse, financial abuse, digital abuse, sexual coercion, reproductive coercion, and stalking. So those are some of the kinds. So if we're looking at, well, what is physical? We know those kind of things: punching, slamming, pinning down, suffocating, choking. Emotional can include things like gaslighting. That is a humongous one. Everyone makes mistakes. All relationships have problems. They try to spin out of responsibilities. They have unrealistic expectations from you. They get really jealous if you spend time with other people. They stonewall and give you the silent treatment. They have sudden mood changes. They might invalidate your opinion. They try to isolate you. They insist that you're cheating. They shame you in front of other people. One common way is that they laugh. They make jokes about your insecurities, and especially in front of other people. Sexual abuse, we know, can be rape, coercion, unwanted sexual contact. It can be anything along those lines. Reproductive coercion, which is one that we don't often think about, can be things like, hey, I'm somebody who hides your birth control, somebody who says, hey, I refuse to use condoms, somebody who threatens violence. If you get pregnant, somebody who threatens or acts out violence if you get pregnant. Acting as if the partner is unfaithful if they want to use contraception. Financial, I think we can pretty much understand those things. Destroying your things, forging faking joint accounts, forging accounts, taking money, controlling finances without discussion. Digital one, that's kind of an interesting one because that's kind of new to our age. So that's, deciding who you can talk to and can't talk to, sexual coercion within that, of photo, videos, threatening to expose those things, threatening exploitation. There's lots and lots of different ways that domestic violence can manifest itself, and it's so important. If I would have the hardest time if I wasn't able to get across the fact that most of the time there are signs in dating, and it can happen to anyone, and even to teens. There's such a high rate in teens. If you see the signs, it is so important to stop. You don't want to emotionally connect or physically connect, if at all possible, until you have checked all these things out. And sometimes we still, they're just awesome and great at this cycle where they are able to disguise themselves, but usually you will see things. And so you want to check out those little things. Did they explode? Maybe not at you, but did they explode? Was it not congruent with what the action was? Did they throw something? Maybe not at you, or maybe at you, but they threw something. You want to take note of all these things, because it is so much easier to get out of when you are dating. It is way easier. There is a risk for when you try to leave a domestic violence relationship to be killed. The risk of violence goes up 6 times when you try to leave a domestic violence relationship. But if you're leaving a dating issue, if you're leaving during dating and these issues come up, it's way easier and better. Make sure that, we'll talk about resources, I'm sure, by the end of this, but if you're in a domestic violence situation, you need to consult with somebody who can go over your individual case to help you with safety as you try to exit these relationships. Don't worry about leaving a potentially good thing, because these guys are so good. These guys and girls, I guess, are so good at disguising themselves and over catering to you and making you think that they're just this wonderful thing, that you're even thinking to yourself, man, this is too good to be true. I can't believe it. And then they mess up. It's really hard for them to keep everything in order. Once they feel they have you, they start messing up, and then they go through this cycle thing. And you will start to question, gosh, they were such a good person. It must be me, like they're telling me. You'll start to question that, and you say, well, I don't want to lose a good thing. If it's me, it's okay to lose a good thing. It's better to risk losing a good thing than to risk being in a domestic violence relationship. Very, very, very important.
Kat, I'm going to stop you right there. And I definitely want you to finish what you're saying, but I don't want to skip over the point that you're talking about in like, A, I don't want to mess up a good thing, but 2, domestic violence can happen most times in cycles. And, people don't always understand that there's something that is actually called the cycle of violence,
right,
which looks at the way a perpetrator will go about becoming violent, the mood that they have right after it, and this is something that's been, studied and studied and studied. And so if you are able, I'm wondering if you can take us through the cycle of violence. If not, I can talk about it a little bit and just look at, what are some of the key hot spots in the cycle. Some cycles have, less phases, some have, many phases that are, really threaded through. But yeah, I don't know if you're up for that, or I know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm up for
this question.
This topic is so important. It is so important, not just during October, but every single month, but especially right now. It is so important because this impacts so many lives, your life, your family's life, your children's life, your well-being, your spiritual, everything. So this is very important. So what you will see with domestic violence assailants is that they are very good at conquering. They're very good conquerors. They are smooth. They are likable. They have this way of being that where they can over cater to you. Like I said, they can love bomb, as they call it. They're just these awesome people. And what can happen, you have this calm, you have this honeymoon stage, and then usually I would say between 3 and 6 months, I'm going to say an episode happens, the first episode. If something happens before 3 months, oh, you better run for the hills, because that's how bad it is. It is even worse than your typical domestic violence. You need to run. So after around 3 to 6 months, usually an episode will happen, and there will be this rationalization, this maybe they'll start off with guilt and, oh, I'm so sorry, or maybe they want to admit it. They'll gaslight, and Then you take them back, and then now we start the cycle, which includes a sense of there's calm. Everything is fine. That episode happened, you got through it, everything is fine, you're calm. And then tension starts building. Little things start happening, little things start getting said. The ball starts getting rolling, but there's not a big episode that occurs. And then there's an incident of violence. Something happens. And then after that, there's this reconciliation piece. They know that they have to do whatever they can to keep you, and they will do so. They'll give you lines like, well, everybody makes mistakes, and I'm just so sorry. Maybe they'll play the victim card. You deserve better than me. And so you'll reconcile, and then what will happen is that there will be this calmness again. And everything is fine, and you feel like, oh, you see, that's right. I should have forgiven this person and continued with them. They are a good person. They just made a mistake. And then tension starts building again. And then an incident of violence occurs. And then there's this reconciliation that happens. And then there's calm. So that's kind of what the domestic violence cycle looks like.
Yes. And one of the things that I don't think people realize is that the explosion, that moment of violence is not the beginning of the cycle. When you get to the moment of violence, you're already in the cycle. The cycle starts at that pursuit phase or that honeymoon phase, that place of being able to bring you in. And by the time you've gotten to the place where he has an explosion, especially an explosion that directly, or she has that explosion where it is involving their intimate partner, you've already been groomed. You've already been invited into the cycle and have been participating. And many people don't actually realize that they have been in a cycle. And so now that I'm exiting out of the explosive, phase of this cycle and going through all of these things, many people see that as the beginning and not realizing that you're actually now on the down end of the cycle, and you're going to start to go back up to be able to close that loop. So thank you for tackling that for us.
The warning signs that lead up to the violence, the two words that I just kept thinking about was manipulation and control. Yes. Those seem to be the telltale signs. So if you're in a relationship with someone and they tend to be manipulative or emotionally manipulative, and they seem to be controlling you, like not getting jealous when you hang out with other people, just very possessive, I think those are telltale signs before you even get to anything that's a violent explosion, that this person might not be emotionally well.
I think that I think two things that you bring up are so important is this idea of possessiveness. That is where things get misconstrued. Let's say if we're talking about a man-woman relationship where the woman is the one that's on the receiving end of the emotional abuse or domestic violence, what can happen is that women are just longing for this acceptance, for this provider, for this person who is manly, who is able to provide for them and to protect them. And so they can mistake possessiveness for masculinity. They can mistake possessiveness or that they can actually be encouraged and enthralled to draw closer to that, because they're saying, wow, gosh, these people before, they never stood up for me. And this one, even though he's telling me, don't you dare wear that. You look kind of fat in that. You look, it's very provocative, and they'll probably use other words. Instead of looking at that and saying, gosh, what is the content of what they're saying, and what are the words that they're using, and what is their thought process towards me, they say, man, I'm so happy I have someone who cares. And look, they extra care. How awesome, how fortunate am I? And so it can look as this over caring that this person has, and they can, because they just are so hungry for it, which we're supposed to get from the Lord, but where they're so hungry for that they just welcome that in, and then they're so far in already emotionally tied that it's very hard for them to pull back once they start crossing the line to even worse. And I think something that's so important, the second thing is that it's so important for people to understand, what does healthy dating look like? Because that's where they start getting trapped. So when there's something that's incongruent between two people, they don't align in a particular way, a domestic violence type of person, a controlling type person, is going to state it. They're gonna hash it out with you. They're gonna get extra mad. They're gonna try to be forceful about their thought process, and that you need to think exactly the same that they do. But a healthy response is to observe in dating, not to try to change somebody or to force them anything, or that they must align with you. Part of dating is figuring out, do we align? Do we align naturally? And I would say, do we align supernaturally? But when somebody has a differing opinion, or they about going out, what to wear, whatever, we're supposed to observe that in dating and then make a decision for ourselves. Is that for me? Can I accept it without changing it? Or is that not for me? And when it's not for me, I walk away. Maybe I address it, but I walk away. We don't force anything. And I think that's one piece that gets missed in dating in the early stages, because they start seeing, hey, at least they're communicating. But what they're really doing is arguing. And what they're really doing is having trouble accepting the fact that you don't agree or believe the way they do. And so they're trying to control and manipulate you to change, so that way they don't have to leave. But that's not the healthy response. That's already a red flag right there.
Hey family, I wanted to take a minute and talk to you about Birmingham Theological Seminary. It's my seminary, and it's a place that I extremely appreciate. They have small class sizes, very reasonable tuition, and professors who are committed to your education and to my education. If you are looking to extend your theological education and are considering seminary, I encourage you to check out Birmingham Theological Seminary. You can go to bts.education for more information.
Get up on the sidewalk, please. Demonstrators clashing with George Floyd. Parts of the
now turning deadly. Anger.
What does it mean to be a Christ follower in this cultural moment and have biblically centered conversations on race, justice, and unity? There's so many, nuggets that are being dropped just in this conversation.
Absolutely.
That, like when we think about DV, it's normally those people out there until it's, like your sister or your mom or, your best friend or you yourself. And so if that's not you, or even if it is, there are ways in which I think as Christians, we should be thinking about domestic violence. One of the things, Kat, that you said is, that sometimes, well, this person really loves me because they show me that they care. They're concerned about what I wear. They don't want me to hang out with these people because, they just love me and want to keep me, for themselves and things like that. And that can be all cute and sweet at the beginning until he don't want you to leave a house or she doesn't want you to leave a house at all. But Kevin, I have a lot of questions for you because you're an elder. I didn't actually think that I would have all these questions, but I have quite a few questions for you.
Okay.
And so my first question for you is have you seen this issue show up in churches that you've been on part of the elder team?
For the sake of this conversation, I wish I could say yes, but I'm thankful that I haven't. And we've had spousal, issues. We've had usually it's more infidelity or they're having issues on the verge of a divorce or something like that. But in terms of physical violence, where we need to remove someone from a situation, praise the Lord, in the churches I've been in, we have not had that situation. That's awesome. But I have outside of that, though, in my personal life when I was much younger, I had a friend in a abusive marriage, and some kind of way I got in the middle of it just as collateral damage. When two people are fighting, sometimes other people get pulled into it, whether we want to or not. And I made a decision that person probably need to be removed from that situation. And so I helped facilitate getting that person out of that situation into a safe environment until things could get worked out. But it was a very strategic way of doing it, in a way that where he wasn't aware it was happening, to avoid any kind of violent blow up or additional violence within the relationship. By the time he knew anything, they were out of harm's way, and I just say that because I saw a news article maybe 2 days ago where these two brothers got killed because there was a domestic violence dispute next door. She runs over for help. The boyfriend comes behind her, and he actually kills these two guys who were just trying to be good Samaritans and help this woman out. And then the perpetrator ends up committing suicide before the police gets there. And so I will say, I know we were going to get solutions and stuff, but I do want to say you have to be careful how you insert yourself in some of these situations, because you just don't know what that person's mental state. And it is that sense of possessiveness and that idea of, if I can't have you, no one else can, or the idea they don't want to live if they can't have you. And just anyone who gets in the way of that, you just don't know what that person is willing to do. So you do have to be very careful how you step into these situations, for your safety and for the safety of the person that's in that situation.
Let me ask you both this question, because Kat, I know that, I know that you're a Christian and you've been a Christian for a long time. And so I know that you're definitely able to answer this question, but, looking at things clinically is more of your area of expertise. And Kevin, definitely as an elder, I'm wanting to hear your thought about this as well. But where do you guys, or do you guys think that the high level of fatherlessness in the Black community contributes to the level of domestic violence we see in the Black community?
Absolutely. Because my first thought is if that's happening, I'm willing to delete.
I got your bail money.
That word, but I think it has a lot to do with the lack of women who understand what a healthy relationship looks like, what a good man looks like, what a good father figure relationship is, and the same thing with men, how to have masculinity in a healthy way, right? But we see this, and also the first thing that comes to my mind is not just lack of father figures, but when these things happen, there's a sense of there's a lack of men around in general, right? Because I come from a large extended family, and I did have a family member that was going through something like this, and it wasn't about her dad, but all of us cousins, we were gonna send a message, and so there does seem to be a lack of just men in general, not just father figures, within the community that these women can lean on. So Kat, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't have any stats with me, but clinically, I do think it's a big impact. I think in general, on multiple levels, lacking a strong family unit definitely impacts domestic violence, emotional abuse, everything along these lines. One, it doesn't stand out when there's not that strong family unit. Domestic violence doesn't stand out as something so odd, because anything goes. There's a lack of boundaries. Anything goes. When there's a strong family unit, you know how it's supposed to look typically. And we can look to scripture for that as well. And so when there's a strong family unit, it's just completely out of place when somebody is violent and disruptive. I think also when there's a lack of a father in the home, now you have those kind of daddy issues that kind of start up, right? Which I don't really like that term, but the issue of I'm lacking the correct affection, the correct relationship, the correct validation from a man, whether you're a woman or whether you're a man. If you don't have a man in the home that's a good man that is married to mom, then you have sons who don't have a good example, and they're trying to figure out, how do I do this, and who's their example? Well, we went from the breakdown of the family unit. We went from serving Jehovah Jireh to Hova. It's crazy. And then we have women who are looked to now in a single family home as everything. They are mom and dad, and is that correct? And then you have how can it not occur that women start to look down upon men if men are not in the home, and if they are the one that is supplementing both parts? And how does that not get transferred to sons? I think that's one thing that we see is this. Sons have a lack of boundaries. They can do whatever they want. But also there's this down talking towards sons sometimes that occurs, right? So there's just, it's so convoluted how this is an impact, and it's so important. And I really hope that we correct that and that we get this back to the way it's supposed to be. And it's going to take those that do know to speak out and to be strong on that.
Those are all good points that both of you bring up, and looking at what happens when, a parent is absent, but especially like the father plays such a huge role in the rearing of children. And I know there are people out there and like, I turned out just fine. I didn't have no daddy, or I'm strong enough to be my kids, mother and father. But no, there's actually something missing. Even if, your kid is missing a mom and you're a single dad, there's still a component missing, and they have different implications or ramifications when a parent is missing, because God's good design is that children have both mother and father.
And it's not even that fathers are just to discipline their children, that's their only role. Equally, what's missing is how fathers love their children. That is such a humongous impact. And like you said, that's God's order. There's a reason why it was supposed to be both.
And reflect identity. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like there's so much.
Yeah. How can you be discipled if there's not someone to disciple you?
Yeah, man. Where do you think the church and like church leadership, and this is for both of you guys, fit in this conversation? Like Kevin, as an elder, one of the things, Kat, that I heard you say was that, we need to be taught how to be loved at times. Like what is the right way to be loved? But for Christians, everything is about love. God is love. And so is the idea of teaching people how to be loved something that the church can actually step in and help with, or help correct the erroneous ways that people, men or women, think about love?
Yeah, absolutely. The older women are to teach the younger, right? And same thing with the men. The older men should be teaching the younger men what it means and what it looks like to be a man, and be a husband, a provider, to love your family well. The church can play a large role in that. Even in the absence of fathers in the home, they can kind of be surrogates in that way. But what we do know is that the church has failed in a lot of those ways, in terms of we've abandoned a lot of discipleship that we used to do. And that's one of the reasons we have a breakdown of family, is the church no longer disciples, right? The church has just become a political machine, which we've seen in full effect this week, right? And that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, if the church was to do its role in evangelism and discipling, and it was had a strong discipling role within the community, then yeah, you would see that played out in older women teaching younger women, and older men teaching younger men what it looks like. But right now, everyone's just growing up and just kind of doing what's right in their own eyes, right? And there's no role model that's healthy in a lot of these cases. We can talk about celebrities and what those relationships look like. But yeah, and so that's really what it is a reflection of. It's a lack of discipleship.
I have lots of ideas of the church and what we could do better at, for sure, in this area. I think that, number one, like I said, I think we need to get people biblically literate. I think when you don't know what God's character looks like and when you don't know what love looks like, how can you display it? You can take your best guess, but you're really going to just go with your flesh because our natural state is sinful. I think we can do a better job with teaching women that we can tear down our own house, and we can teach men that the Bible doesn't say force your wife or your partner to submit. That's a command for that particular person, not for you to force them, right? I think there's a lot of things that we can do better at the pulpit. We're trying, but we could just do better. I think that we can start addressing dating, not just marriage. You know, a lot of times people go to church and they think, if they're single, they think, well, this is not really for me. They're not addressing me. They're not talking to me. It's always about marriage, which I love talking about marriage, and I think it's so important. But we also need to talk about what should healthy dating look like. And we tend to focus on, well, make sure you don't have sex before marriage. And that's very true. Make sure you don't have sex before marriage. But there's also other things like, what does a godly character look like when you're dating? What does dating look like? What does a godly breakup look like? These things are really important. We need to start preaching from the pulpit. The men need to start preaching from the pulpit that our being Christian trumps our ethnic culture. We keep the good, but we leave the bad. Anything that's anti-biblical or not of God, we leave. I think this one might ruffle a few feathers, but I think that we need to do a better job in the church of defining and teaching good doctrine about divorce and about separation. And I am completely for marriage. We don't even talk about the D word, my husband and I completely. But people I think that people aren't speaking up in the church about domestic violence because they're afraid that someone's going to tell them they shouldn't divorce. So they don't, and they're going to tell them, hey, you're wrong. Don't do that. And so the questions that I have is, how is the church defining things? It's very important. It's not that I'm advocating divorce in all situations at all, but I think we need to do a better job at teaching good doctrine so people understand what they can do and what's not biblically appropriate. So things like, what does porneia mean in Matthew? Can one separate? Is separation a Christian? Is that acceptable in Christianity biblically? Can one separate a divorce but not remarry? Like in 1 Corinthians, what does the church say? What does the Bible actually say? So that people might have more education about what do they do in these situations. Discipleship, I completely agree. Hearing more testimonies. You know, if more people were honest, less people would feel the need to conceal things or to lie. We need to be more honest in the church, and we need to not look the other way like we do sometimes. Helping at domestic violence shelters. We should be at the forefront. This is what we used to do. We should, as a church, be at the forefront of ministering to these people. We know what the answer is when there's death, despair, when there's a lack of hope, when there are broken relationships. That's our department, right? And hopefully it's not death that we're dealing with. I guess I just kind of included that as what Christians are, what we can claim to know over, but that's our area. We're supposed to rush in. And so those are some practical things I think we can do. We can train staff better of how to respond to this, because their typical response is, well, what does the Bible say? Only if there's sexual infidelity, right? So, and they're just not really sure what to do. They get really nervous and they say, oh, go. They don't know how to answer the question. Maybe we should have more resources to know that they need to be linked to somebody who can go over their specific case to tell them how to make a safety plan, how to get out, because that's very important. To make sure you have your ducks in a row, if possible. I know this is kind of silly and it's going to sound silly, but there's a lot of times that what's perpetuated is we never talk negatively about our spouse. We never talk negatively about the person we're dating. We just don't talk negatively. And I agree. I think gossipiness is something we're supposed to run far from. But because we promote that idea so much, when things come up, people don't share that with their loved ones, the people that they trust. And so domestic violence in the early stages goes under the radar because nobody wants to say anything. Where I think, don't speak overly negative, but you can speak the truth. You should have some people that you love, that you can trust, that you can go over kind of what's going on in your relationship, because people will keep these things to themselves, and isolation is what's going to perpetuate it more. So it would be nice if you had some people in your corner to tell you the truth in love when you need it. I have lots of millions of other things, but I kind of will stop there.
That's an awesome list. Thank you. Can you, and we are almost at time, can you give us a couple of resources that people can, go to if they are finding themselves, men or women, in this situation?
Yes, definitely. One that is very, very well known is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So in the United States, if you're listening, there's a National Domestic Hotline. They have made it so easy for you. You can call, you can look on their website, which is thehotline.org. What you should know when you're going online is that if you're with somebody who's tracking your internet use, you may have to go a different route. So as soon as you go onto that website, that link is going to pop up and it gives you an exit. Because what can happen is if they find out that you're doing this research, they can get more irate and violence can go up. So the website, thehotline.org, you can call at 1-800-799-SAFE, which is SAFE, or 7233. You can also text START to 88788. There is also, this is an awesome resource that I found not too long ago, and it is the National Dating Abuse Helpline. And that is 866-331-9474. So this comes with a project of Love is Respect, and it's really aimed towards teens and young adults. But the information that I found online was awesome thus far, anyway. And you can, and so I would encourage almost anybody to look at that. You can also text LOVEIS to 22522. And one important one that I want to make sure that I get the very important is that there's a national crisis hotline to call if you're in crisis, if you're feeling suicidal, whatever it is. It's 988. You can call, you can text, and whatever it is, get help. You can go see an individual therapist, however you want, but those are the lines that I would start you off with.
And we'll make sure to include all of that information in our show notes as well.
Awesome.
All right. Last question is for both of you. What encouragement would you give to someone who finds themselves in this situation? And can you offer a truly biblical definition of love?
Ooh. I'll go first, and I'll let Kat get the last word. So what I want people to know, so if you are a victim of domestic violence, I just want to say that know that it's not your fault. Know that this isn't because of something you did. You are the victim in this. And that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and that you are not alone, and there are ways for you to get help. The information is going to be down in the show notes, so please utilize those if you have to, or confide in someone who's close to you that can help you get out of the situation that you need to get out of. If you are someone who is committing domestic violence, I would say you need to repent. You need to stop, and you need to repent. And whether or not that person stays or leaves, you need to look in the mirror and stop. Because there's never any justification to physically harm someone or even emotionally harm someone, to try to manipulate someone or tear down someone so that they feel the need to stay with you. If that is the case, then you yourself need to seek some counseling and help, because that need and desire to have that person is a sign that you need some help. And so that's what I will say with those things. In terms of a biblical definition of love, love is in action. It is to put someone above yourself. It is to die to self and to put someone else's well-being over you. And if you are someone who is abusing someone, that is the last thing you're doing. You're doing the exact opposite of that. And so, use Christ as our example. to love someone is to put them above you in all ways. And so, if you are a domestic violence victim and someone is not loving you in that way, then that is not love either, you know? And so that is what I will say. Kat?
Those are very good questions. The thing that I will say, if you find yourself in a domestic violence situation, is don't worry so much of how did I get here. You review that, but later. Get out first. What can happen in domestic violence relationships is that often the women, the men too, so people typically will beat themselves up emotionally because they say, man, how did I get here? They get embarrassed. How did I get here? I can't believe I allowed for this. Forget all that. That is not as important as your safety. That is not as important as your children's safety. That can be looked at later and worked out. You can grow, you can learn about healthy relationships, all those things. What you need to focus on is less about the how did we get here and more on getting help. I will say, if you are in the beginning stages, if you are on this side of the aisle, you have not yet said I do, and you are in the beginning stages of dating, please exit. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them anything. Get out. If it is occurring in dating, it will occur 100 more times in marriage. If you are already in this relationship and you find yourself here and you just didn't realize it and you're ready to explore that, you need to get help. You need to talk to somebody who can talk about your individual case, because the risk that comes to you of trying to leave for the reasons that Kevin mentioned before, I don't want anybody to be with that person, and that risk goes up. Also, when you flee domestic violence relationship, there are things you're going to want to take with you if at all possible. And these helpers who are trained can remind you, make sure you take your Social Security stuff, make sure you take your birth certificates, make sure, if at all possible, make sure you go get help. So again, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. For the family and friends of those that are going through domestic violence, oh man, guard your heart. Don't guard it across from them, that you exit them out or that you won't talk to them, but just know that there is such a rate of going back and forth that it is so weighing on your heart, and make sure that you're getting the help that you need and you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing and that you are plugging away with the Lord. Now, a definition of love. Oh man. I mean, we know the love is kind, love is patient. We know those things, right? I think that we can look to particular scriptures of women in Proverbs 14:1, the wisest of women build up her house, but with folly with her own hand she tears it down. So love looks like building up your own house. We know the fruit of the Spirit. We know God's character. Those are the things that love is supposed to look like. Love is supposed to build up. It is supposed to edify. It is supposed to point you closer to Christ, not take you farther away. Your relationships with others that are good, your family, your loved ones, your friends, those things should get better. You should be getting closer. Love looks like taking responsibility for yourself. Love is sacrificial in particular ways. We help each other grow and get closer to Christ. We bear each other's burdens in that way, right? We help them in their sinful states to get better. One thing that gets missed is truth in love. And I want to clarify this. A lot of times we think the Christian response is to just love them more. It's just to be kinder, more forgiving. But forgiving doesn't mean accepting. It doesn't mean continuing on. It doesn't mean allow somebody to run rampant in your life and create havoc. That is not loving. When we say, I'll just love them more and they'll get better, actually, a lot of times they get worse. Loving them better does not help them get better. There needs to be boundaries that are placed there needs to be some sort of consequence that they feel often in order for them to get better. So remember that it's not just loving them more, it's speaking truth in love and setting the limits where you need it. I think in Ephesians 4 reminds us to put on to put off our old self and put on our new self. Well, that's part of love. We put off our carnal flesh side and we put on the new self. We're renewed in the spirit of our mind. We have the fruit of the Spirit. We start exhibiting God's character. I think those are very important. And Ephesians 5 tells us how wives and husbands are to love each other. Again, not a a command for the husband to force the wife and not a command for the wife to force the husband. That's not what it says. It's a command for you to love in this particular way.
Thank you both. Thank you both. When I think about, love, I always go to the verse in 1 John 4 where it says God is love. And so when I think about relationships, especially, godly relationships where both believers are, or both, participants in the relationship are Christians, the relationship should be pointing us toward God. It should reflect the heart of Christ. We should be pursuing Christ in that. Love should look sacrificial. And so thank you guys for offering that wisdom to us. We appreciate it very much. Kevin, I know you didn't know you was going to be a guest today. Sorry about that, friend.
I didn't, but I'm glad. I mean, this was a really good discussion. I hope that a lot of people get to listen to this and are helped by it.
Yes, definitely. Kat, thank you so much for joining us on this sober but important conversation. Tell us about your podcast, Beautifully Rooted, and where people can find you.
Sure. Our podcast, I'm looking at my notes so I don't forget anything. Our podcast is called The Rooted and Edified Show. It's a conservative Christian show for both men and women, where we showcase the 4 T's, which are testimonies, topics, talents, and theology. It's called The Rooted and Edified Show because we want to help people get rooted in Christ and to stay there and to build them up. And as Colossians 2:6-8 tells us, my husband and I, Manny Elias, get to interview amazing people and go over amazing, wonderful information that is so helpful. I try to look at, after the episode is done, was that helpful for people? And when I think about topics, I try to think about, was that helpful? And so that is our goal, is to try to build up the body. It's an audio podcast and a video one. It's on all the major platforms and the smaller ones. It's on YouTube as well. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is at Rooted and Edified, and you can reach us via email at rootedandedified@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah. Kevin, any last thoughts?
No. Tell Manny we said hello.
I will. I'll give him a kiss. Yes.
Well, that can be from you. Okay.
Not from you, yeah.
All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for being with us. If the podcast has been helpful to you, please consider giving to the Center for Biblical Unity. Your support helps to keep our ministry going every day. We are so grateful for all of your love and support. Please make sure to comment in the comment section. Let us know what you thought about this episode, and we will see you next time. Bye.